What's up, gamers? I'm in the mood to revisit Jedi Fallen Order because I remember it being this great Star Wars game, and now is as good as a time as ever as Jedi Survivor, the sequel, is on its way. I just hope there weren't any big things about the game that I forgot about. Before 2013 and Jedi Fallen Order's release, Star Wars fans had a steady release of games. This ranged from everything like Knights of the Old Republic, the classic Battlefront games, Force Unleashed, etc. You get the point. We had a variety of Star Wars games coming out that reflected a bunch of different genres and playstyles in gaming. Of course, some were better than others, but there was at least enough for everyone to be happy at the end of the day. Then in 2007, EA bought BioWare and Pandemic Studios, some of the people responsible for these great Star Wars games. Which you might think, this is great. These teams now get even more funding for their Star Wars projects. Oh, you poor bastard. You must have forgotten the company you're dealing with. EA went on to really only use BioWare for their other more popular franchises, like Mass Effect, shut down Pandemic Studios 2 years after buying them, and gave the Battlefront series to DICE, and we all know what happened next. EA's favorite pastime of exploiting minors for a financial profit. The cherry on top of this shitstorm was that in 2013, Disney then gave EA exclusive rights to Star Wars games made in the next 10 years. At this point, there just wasn't much hope, as a company that prides itself on hating single-player games now decides Star Wars gaming media, or at least until our knight in shining armor, Respawn Entertainment, came in to announce a brand new single-player adventure game set in the Star Wars universe, Respawn being responsible as well for the great Titanfall games if you're not already aware. The game announced, Jedi Fallen Order, was later released on November 10th, 2019. The story of the game follows Cal Kestis, played by Cameron Monaghan, on his journey to find a holocron containing a list of Force-sensitive children. Of course, I will be talking about spoilers for the story. Jedi Fallen Order starts with this great tutorial sequence set on the planet Bracca. This section is just great at showing the huge scale of the outer Star Wars universe with some cool set pieces, while introducing us to the basic movement and exploration options. Though after Cal reactivates his Force powers to save his best friend Prof, Cal relives his past with a flashback of his mentor, which I'll go over a bit more later as it becomes a reoccurring element of the game's progression. The second sister, the main villain of the game, and the Empire then arrive to find the Jedi. While escaping from the Empire, we learn about the basic lightsaber attacks and enemies we'll be dealing with. The tutorial then ends with us being saved by former Jedi Seer Junda and our pilot, Grease. Overall, a great tutorial to introduce players to the story and gameplay. But we aren't quite done setting up the story, as they take us to the planet Bogano, on which we find our robot companion for the game, BD-1, who will give us health stims and, more importantly, help us recover logs of the former Jedi that hid the holocron containing the list of Force-sensitive kids. They hid it within a temple, and in order to unlock this temple, we need to recover the logs and master Cal's locked-away Force abilities. A premise that's really all you need for a Star Wars game. I love the lightsaber combat throughout the game. Many compare it to Dark Souls, which honestly isn't that far off. We do have the same standard elements for both, dodge, parry, hit. Though while Dark Souls goes for more difficulty, I feel Fallen Order is much more lenient if you mess up, even on the higher difficulties. I personally played on Jedi Master, which I know it isn't the max difficulty, but it is the average for what most people will be playing, as it's between the normal and max difficulty modes. The reasoning behind this is that only a few enemies combo you, so that means if you miss a parry, you aren't screwed. Also, while this might not make a whole lot of sense from a story point of view, the game properly shows what attacks are unparryable by turning the enemy red. I personally feel that this just helps to make the gameplay less aggravating, as you have more resources to understand what you're doing wrong in a fight, rather than just getting angry. But I would understand if people aren't a fan of this. Something that helps Fallen Order separate itself more from Dark Souls would be that it uses a skill tree in order to unlock new moves and combos for your lightsaber, rather than souls/runes. I love this as it really makes you think on what might be better to get, some more health for Cal or stronger abilities. But going right back to the Dark Souls series comparisons, you have to be at a meditation area to use the skill tree, which is a glorified stand-in for bonfires, as it refills your health and stims at the cost of bringing back enemies. And similar to the Dark Souls games, but a bit different, you receive your lost XP by hitting the enemy that killed you. This is neat as it punishes you for dying, but not by just making you lose XP. But due to the yellow aura surrounding them, you can't see the red unblockable attacks until you hit them. Later on, Cal also gains the double-bladed lightsaber, which reminds me a lot of Ghost of Tsushima's stances. I say this as the single and double blades each have their own purpose. The single blade does more damage, but the double-bladed saber is better for crowd control. I often stuck with the double blade myself, but it felt great switching between them when I needed to. Lightsaber throws get added onto Cal's moveset with the skill tree, which I thought had a lot of potential, but really went underutilized in my opinion, sadly. Same for the ability to split the saber into two, as it only gets used for one move, though that at least seems to be getting fixed in the sequel. On the other side of things for combat, we have the force abilities, consisting of slow, pull, and push. I wish there were more included personally, though I understand as to why, as there isn't much left to choose from unless you go for dark side abilities. In combat itself, these abilities were really only useful for separating groups of enemies and taking care of some of the harder enemies to attack up close. Their real use comes in exploration, as they open up new paths, and some force abilities like the wall run and double jump are only used with movement, though I'll get a bit more into exploration later. I wish there were more chances to use the movement abilities in combat, like jumping over someone then force pushing them into a group of enemies that were behind you, or wall running up to some enemies. Force abilities are probably one of the biggest things I wish got expanded, as without it, the game loses what makes it unique. Something that I really love about the force abilities is that you unlock them by seeing flashbacks of Cal and his master Jaro Tapal, which I briefly mentioned earlier. Instead of Cal having to train or learn the moves for the first time, I love that we see Cal revisiting his past memories and the lessons he was taught, past just the abilities. It helps to really show off his relationship with his master and why he might blame himself for Jaro's death during Order 66. That whole sequence in general of Cal running away from the troopers during Order 66 was really great, as it showed how helpless the situation really was. My favorite moment had to be the last flashback sequence in the Dathomir Temple, where at first Cal loses himself after dueling Jaro due to his feelings around his death, but after rebuilding his broken lightsaber and talking with Seer, he returns to the vision, but promises to honor his master. Overall, just great ways to introduce the Force abilities by expanding on Cal's story. Of course, none of these abilities would mean anything without some enemies, and I gotta say, I love how they all act. You're able to parry blaster bolts shot at you and send them back to kill the enemy that shot them. The Purge Troopers are actually threats when you find them, as they hit harder and faster, making it harder to parry them. Also, certain enemies have more block charge than others, meaning you can't just parry them once then be done with the fight. BD1 can hack droids, if they're at a low enough health, to fight for you. And also, enemies just fight each other. You could walk into a fight and be targeted by a bunch of animals and troopers at once, or you could let them kill each other for you, with you taking out the scraps still left standing after the fight. The bigger enemies are awesome too, as if you do this cool finisher when they're weak or parried, you gain all of your force charge back. I also love the hidden mini-bosses, which are upgraded versions of the bigger enemies. But on the other side of the spectrum, what does the exploration look like? Looks normal to me. What the? Jedi Fallen Order has a lot of Metroidvania-esque elements when exploring, as you have this big, interconnected map that gets locked off by platforming sections and ability-specific barriers. This normally wouldn't be considered a bad thing either, but when you look at how terrible the map is in this game, you start to realize. I understand that it's meant to be a projection from BD1, but when you're sacrificing gameplay for lore accuracy, that's not a good thing. Now, I get that they couldn't have made it a flat map map either, due to the overlapping paths, but they didn't have to make it see-through blue of all colors. The only thing stopping this from being a serious problem with the game is the fact that the game's pretty linear, but when you have to go back and explore the worlds for collectibles, it is a nightmare finding how to get to places. Throughout the game, we'll be jumping across 5 core planets: Bogano, Zepho, Kashyyyk, Dathomir, and Ilum. They each feel unique, not just due to their environmental differences like forest, ice, mountain, etc., but due to the different puzzles, traversal methods, and enemies. I also never felt that the game took too much or too little time on one planet. They each serve their purpose and move on, which is great. The only thing that could be considered a negative is that there weren't more of them. Exploration and finding new things felt great, as it never took a while until the next scan or chest. Something that's really awesome is that you can actually go to Dathomir much earlier in the game if you scan it on a wall. It gives an extra reward to finding stuff, though due to the few planets, this only happens once. As we progress through the story, Cal learns more about the ancient Zepho race and meets some new people like Marin, who's a witch from Dathomir, though the best part of progressing is seeing some of the awesome boss fights. We obviously fight the second sister multiple times, as she's the main villain, with us eventually learning that she's Seer's past Padawan, Trilla. Her fights are definitely the most generic, as it doesn't take a lot to learn her moves. She's really just a stronger enemy. Though we also fought the ninth sister, which felt really fun to parry and learn their moves. This one just felt really balanced overall, with the fight ending with us cutting her hand off. The Gogora fight helps to give a huge scale to the fights. It reminds me of some of the games that Fallen Order took elements from, such as Dark Souls. It also reflects the giant peaceful bird that we find earlier in the game. But my favorite boss has to be the fallen Jedi, Terran Malicos, as all he wants is power, and that gets perfectly represented in his fight. You can't use force moves against him, but instead have to rely on your pure combat and parries with the lightsaber. He's so strong, you even need Marin's help to defeat him. Just a character that I love seeing their story play out. At the end of the story, we see Trilla stealing the holocron and heading to Fortress Inquisitress, the final level. We follow her there where we fight the Empire and track her down, leading to the final boss fight, and I actually didn't like it that much. It was basically a rehash of all previous fights with the second sister, which were in turn rehashes of just basic enemy fights, so it just got boring. Though the one twist that this fight does actually have is its difficulty. While most attacks are at first easy to dodge, in the second half she gets faster and breaks up your attention by using shockwaves and drones. You might be saying, well, okay, the boss fight's hard, get over it. But it's not just that. Trilla is a damage sponge. It takes forever to break her guard, and when you do barely any damage. So at that point, it just becomes a marathon of dodging attacks until you can do enough damage to kill her. This then leads into one of the most badass villain intros ever. We run to escape Vader, and after a few close calls, we get saved by our friends and destroy the holocron. We aren't quite done yet with the game, as we also have the collectibles. Of course, there's chests that give us different colors for our ships, Poncho, and BD1, though they also give us lightsaber customization options, which might seem great, but you'll almost never see the saber itself, rather the color of its blade, which you unlock on Ilum. Past that, we have scans and force echoes, which only serve to give us more lore and make completion a nightmare. You see on the map, you can see which areas still have chests and secrets left to find, but the scans and echoes aren't included here, meaning you have to either painfully search for where they might be based on the logbook section that they're in, or just give up and look on YouTube. I more often than not chose the latter option. Terrarium seeds are a part of this, which is a much better unlockable in my opinion, as it's more interactive than just lore, as you can see the plants grow on the ship over time. The final big collectible would be stim canisters, which, as you might think, just give BD1 more stims to heal you with, there being a max of 10 you can have. Achievements could also be considered a form of collectible that you can unlock all in one playthrough, which is nice as you don't have to worry about the difficulty you're on. Hell, you don't even need to get everything like the lore files, just the big ones like chests and stim canisters. Apart from that, you just need to do a few specific combat moves repeatedly in order to get all achievements. Post-game options are pretty great too, as you get the chance to play some fun yet difficult combat challenges. The only reward here is some BD1 skins for unlocking a few points. The battle grid upgrade is neat too, as you can set up your own battles or make enemies fight each other. The last core post-game option is New Game Plus, which, just like all others, is just the game again with you being stronger this time around. Though, of course, with all EA games, no matter how good they are, there's at least one flaw that brings down the whole experience, and you've probably seen it while I've been talking about the game. Jedi Fallen Order has some of the worst optimization I've ever seen recently. Just in the tutorial section, which is about 30 minutes long, I counted over 45 instances of unloaded textures, frame rate changes, the game not fully loading in, lighting issues, etc. This continued into being a constant problem throughout the game, though thankfully not as bad or noticeable as in the tutorial. It really just sucks, as it seems that if the game took a bit longer to release in order to fix these issues, the game would have been perfect. But it's been a little over 3 years since the game came out, and this is still an issue plaguing the game to this day, as there hasn't been any patches released. It's not even like this is the most advanced game ever that just can't run on PS4 and Xbox One. There are bigger games out there that were released earlier and run better. It's a shame, and I'm not even seeing the worst of it, as apparently on PC, the game runs so much worse. Despite the problems plaguing the game's performance, I still have to recommend it, as it's still playable, and a damn good game at that. It takes what works with other franchises like Dark Souls, but makes it more accessible for a wider audience, making it go up there with the other great Star Wars games in my opinion. Now we just need to hope the sequel expands on this game's elements to make it an even greater game. But knowing EA, they'll find some way to scam some miners for a quick buck.